afternoon. I'm Julie Broughton. It is now 12:32. This is Take 6. We're so happy you stopped by. If you haven't been with us before, first of all, welcome. This is when we get together after our noon newscast and we can talk about what we're working on here in our News 6 newsroom that you'll see coming up later today. Now, if you've looked at the calendar, the date, you know it is August 13th. If you are a longtime Central Floridian or Floridian, you know that date definitely means something to you. It was Friday, August 13th, 20 years ago that Hurricane Charley made landfall in Florida as a Category 4 storm in total, causing $14 billion in damages and killing 15 people. We're going to talk more about Charley with News 6 investigator Mike Deforest, who was working right here in the News 6 newsroom on that day and was out covering Charley. So we'll talk more with him in just a few minutes. But first, it is back to school, and along with a new school year comes a new law that a lot of people are talking about. And this one specifically talks about what teachers are being taught. News 6 investigator Lewis Bolden joins us now, and he's been looking into House Bill 1291. And Lewis, this pertains to identity politics, right?
That's right. That's right. This was probably the most controversial bill out of last legislative session. Republicans and Democrats went back and forth on this one for quite a while. It is modeled after House Bill 7, which was passed in 2022, and that became known as the Stop Woke Act. And that limited the types of discussions that could be had in classrooms regarding race and racism. So with this limits the discussion that can be had on race and racism in teacher preparation programs. These are the programs that teachers need in order to get their certification to be a teacher. And we spoke with one of the Republican lawmakers who authored this bill, and he says it is all about not indoctrinating children. Let's take a listen.
We want to push back against some of those themes, all of those themes, quite frankly.
State Representative Bernie Jacques is in Pinellas County, so we interviewed him via Zoom. He is one of the sponsors of House Bill 1291, Educator Preparation Programs. It took effect in July and now prohibits what teachers can be taught in prep programs that lead to their certifications.
Removing the indoctrination from our curriculum and to making sure that kids are focused on the basics.
House Bill 1291 is only 6 pages long, but one paragraph struck a nerve with critics. Teacher prep programs are prohibited from using curriculums based on theories that systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege are inherent in the institutions of the United States.
Whether it was the critical race theory and other notions of systemic racism.
Do you think racism exists?
Yes, there are individual racists, absolutely, but this is not a racist country.
Coming up tonight, the pushback. Critics call it censorship, saying the law is preventing teachers from teaching the truth. I'm investigator Lewis Bolden, and I'll have that part of the story coming up tonight on News 6. Yes, that version of the story is coming up tonight at 6 o'clock on News 6. And a lot of organizations have already been pushing back against this law that took effect in July. Equality Florida, the American Civil Liberties Union. In fact, we talked to Keisha Mulford, who is the communication strategist with the ACLU. And she has some strong opinions about this law. And so we're gonna be taking a closer look at that coming up this evening. But you heard Representative Jacques say that it's about not indoctrinating kids, but some believe that it is muzzling teachers from teaching the truth in the classroom. So we're going to hash it all out later on this evening.
So this bill or this law dictates what teachers are allowed to learn, and then that goes into what they're allowed to teach. So that paragraph that you highlighted about systemic racism and privilege and all that, so that basically means that they can't be taught about it, therefore they cannot use those terms or anything like that in the classroom.
Basically, and that's like what you just described, and how you tried to get at that is what the critics are saying about the law, that the law is vague and it's making it confusing in the classroom because teachers don't know what they can say and what they can't say. We saw this with the law that became known as Don't Say Gay. I remember doing a story about that a few years ago, and there was a lot of confusion among teachers headed back to school, and they were stressed out because they didn't know what they could say and what they couldn't say. And so the critics of this law say that it is vague, and it's vague by intention. And so, yeah, but it does limit how you can talk about race, racism, oppression, privilege. And those are, pretty heady topics there. And so
Yeah.
that is one of the criticisms, that it's so vague. It's talking about identity politics, but it doesn't define identity politics in the law. So that's one of the criticisms as well.
Yeah, I imagine teachers probably have some pretty strong opinions on this as well. I don't know if you've talked to any teachers or if you've heard from any teachers or what made you say, hey, this is a story that I need to do for back to school week. But that is, I'm confused. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's like if I were a teacher, I'm not sure what I would be able to teach because I'm thinking back about my history classes. Think about your history classes in school.
Hmm.
And I feel like much of our history is based on all of those things that you just laid out in that paragraph. So, yeah,
Hmm. And so how do you teach those things? And so
right.
there are some people who believe that it is about not teaching the truth. It is preventing teachers from teaching the truth. That's what critics say. They say that, personality politics, identity politics are. They're saying that just because you look a certain way, that you're of a certain race, that you don't have to necessarily subscribe to certain beliefs. And so that's what they say they don't want talk, is identity politics. But again, how do you define that? So that's
Right.
that's the issue.
All right, Lewis, what time can we see your next story? I really I need to watch this. I need to see it.
Okay. It is coming up tonight at 6. We have a shorter version at 4 o'clock, but the full
Okay.
story is coming up at 6 o'clock.
Ooh, you're in one of my shows. I can't wait to see you in the studio at 4, Lewis.
Listen, and I can't wait to hear this conversation about Hurricane Charlie. I mean, I was
Okay.
in this newsroom too, and
Okay,
I remember that time.
I was going to ask if you were here. What year did you come to Central Florida? I know we've talked about this, but we've both been here so long it all runs together.
Yes, I got here in September of 2001, and if I
Okay.
remember correct, yeah, Charlie was. This is the anniversary. This is
Yeah,
the 20-year
20 years
anniversary
today.
today.
Yeah, Friday the
We
13th.
had,
Oh,
and Mike DeForest is going to get into this, but we had no idea what was coming. We had no idea, and just like hearing Hurricane Charlie right now, 20 years later, makes me exhausted. Makes
well,
me absolutely exhausted.
I was preparing some stuff for the 4 o'clock show for a discussion that we're going to have at 4 with our producer Brooke, and I was looking at the track and going back in the archive, and I said, "Oh my gosh, my stomach hurts! Like I can't look at this." But you said we had no idea. I was fresh out of the Midwest, and I remember when I came here, and I came in April 2001, and I was working at another station. I remember one of the other Mets who had been in town for a while said, "Oh well, we don't really get hit with hurricanes here. They either curve or they do this, so we won't see any like big hits from hurricanes." And then I remember when that hurricane was happening, somebody came in the weather office like, "Come outside. You're never going to see another hurricane in your career." And boy, they were wrong. I wish we had been.
Boy, were they wrong.
Right, but at the time, everybody, you would talk during hurricane season, or you'd go and you'd do these talks, and people would say, "Oh, well, we haven't seen anything since Donna in 1960," and that was true. There hadn't been anything major since the 60s and Donna, so I think people had hurricane amnesia, and most people who lived here hadn't experienced it. So we don't have hurricane amnesia anymore.
And,
We're
and you
awake.
know what, that we're awake. And let me tell you, I was told the same thing. I got here in 2001, and I believe Hurricane Charlie was my first hurricane. Like
Yeah, it would.
I
Yeah, it would have
had
been.
no
Hmm.
idea how to cover a hurricane, and people said the same thing. Oh, we're so far inland, we don't get them that often.
Right, right. It'll brush the coast. It'll do this, but we learned lots of lessons that year. So, yeah. All right,
Yes, and we
Lewis.
had to learn them quickly because those storms came quickly. But you and Mike DeForest are about to get into that.
Yes, yes. We will talk more about that. Lewis, thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you at 4 and then your longer story at 6. Before we catch up with Mike DeForest, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Welcome back here at 1244. This is Take 6. I'm Julie Broughton. We're so happy you stuck with us through the break. And as we were talking about a little bit earlier, today is the 20-year anniversary of when Hurricane Charlie just ripped through Central Florida. That was Friday, August 13th, 2004, a day we all remember. Did so much damage, and certainly was one of the first big hurricanes we had dealt with since the 60s. News 6 investigator Mike Deforest is joining me now. And Mike, you posted some video to your Facebook earlier today. You were, first of all, how long had you been in Orlando at that time? Lewis and I were just talking about how when we came here, we were both told oh, the hurricanes never have a direct hit. And then, of course, that came. How long had you been here at that time?
I've been here almost 24 years now.
Okay.
So, and I can't believe this was 20 years ago because my socks are still wet from that night. That was a
oh my gosh.
long night. Yeah, I even though I was relatively new to Central Florida, I think when Hurricane Charlie came through, most Central Floridians, even longtime residents, were new to hurricanes hitting this part of the state. And when we saw this hurricane headed our way, I think the original reaction was, we're inland. We're not going to feel the effects of this. Boy, were we wrong.
Right. Just first of all, looking at that video makes my stomach hurt. And you're in Sanford. And I remember I was working at a different station. But of course, I remember we had a reporter on standing in Sanford, and they were on Lake Monroe, and there were white caps on Lake Monroe. And who is this gentleman?
This was a man walking down the street with a beer. We met all sorts of interesting characters that night. It's interesting. Part of the reason it ended up being to my detriment that we chose to go live along Lake Monroe. Now, first of all, anytime you see us in these hurricanes, we always intentionally choose safe spots. We make sure that there's going to be nothing around that can hit us. We want to give the viewers at home a window into the world of what it looks like, but we want to also be very safe. So that was part of the reason we chose that. The Sanford Riverwalk at that point was brand new, so the palm trees were freshly planted at the beginning of the night. By the end of the night, they were all uprooted because they were newly put in the soil. But back then, our technology for TV news, we used those live trucks, called them ENG trucks, that have the big masts that go up into the air. We don't use those as much anymore, but back then that was our key way of broadcasting our signal live. Unfortunately, during storms and heavy winds, we cannot put that mast up. Well, I intentionally chose Lake Monroe because we could actually run our truck with our mast all the way down. We were able to shoot our signal across Lake Monroe to where Channel 6 had a tower on the other side of the lake. That was great because the wind didn't knock our signal off. That was terrible because the wind didn't knock our signal off. And so throughout the evening, everybody else's live shots across town were dying, and ours was the only one up. And I remember at one point we were soaked, dripping wet, wind blown, and I'm telling the anchors, hey, we're going to go back and sit in the truck and dry off for a little bit. They're like, no, Mike, you can't leave because you're the only picture we've got into the world out there right now. So we ended up spending several hours live on the air that night 20 years ago.
Yeah, the anchors in the dry studio telling you can't leave. Oh, there's video of just Tom Sorrells. Oh, boy, look at that.
And you see the lights flicker. Here at Channel 6, throughout everywhere in Central Florida, we lost power. We lost power here at Channel 6. Unbelievably, thanks to our talented engineers, we're able to keep our station broadcasting. I compared it to Apollo 13, where they had to flick off all the power switches except for the bare minimum to keep the space capsule running. That's basically what Channel 6 was like. We had a couple generators out in the parking lot, and they were able to, we had our computers turned off in the building, the lights. It was the bare minimum amount of power we needed to be able to broadcast, and we stayed on throughout the entire evening when I understand some of the other TV stations decided to go back to entertainment programming that night.
Okay, I can confirm I did not go back to entertainment programming. I think I blacked out a lot of this because I think we were on like 18 hours. And the thing with Charlie, and I'm sure you know this because you were out there, it moved through so fast. It was like fast and furious. And then you're left with its calm and just the damage. So many trees were down. I think it's hard to imagine if you weren't here. I remember going into work that afternoon and then driving home the next day. And the landscape was so different driving through College Park and driving through Winter Park with those trees coming down. And it was just like an experience unlike I thought we could. I don't know. I just feel like I divide my life into before 2004 hurricanes and after. And I think a lot of people who were here feel that way because, like you said, we hadn't seen a hurricane since Donna in the 60s. And then this was the busiest hurricane season we've had on record in Central Florida in 2004.
Right. We had 4 that hit the state that year, 3 that directly crisscrossed Central Florida. And again, after decades or more without a storm. And kind of the reaction I remember, and I know a lot of other folks felt this way. At first, you got to say there was a little bit of anticipation with Charlie. This first storm,
Yeah.
people naively in Central Florida thought, oh, it can't be that bad since we're inland. We're not going to get battered with the waves like you would out on the coast. But as you mentioned, trees down, power lines down, lots of folks lost power. And that's when you realize, wow, even inland, you can be impacted by this storm. Well, what was it? 2-3 weeks later, Francis comes along.
Yep.
Now people are terrified because they lived through this 3 weeks earlier and they knew how bad it could get. And I remember there was just this sickness in your stomach when you saw it coming. And unlike Charlie, I believe it was Francis the super soaker that just slowly moved across Central Florida. And then what? 3 weeks later comes Gene. And I remember at that point, instead of the anticipation or the fear, it was exhaustion. It was just, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get through one more of these. Just get it over with. So it was so many emotions that summer as we had these storms. And as I talk about this, I do not want to make light of these storms. I know folks lost their lives, folks lost their homes, damage, just unbelievable damage. So as we talk about this 20 years later, I don't want to make light of this. But looking back, it was just interesting from a historical perspective when we hadn't had these storms and then boom, 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 one on top of the other.
Yeah. And like you said, with Charlie, there was a little bit of like, oh, this is, this is a big deal, but we're inland, so it's not going to be that bad. And then just the damage, the trees, and people being without power for weeks. People were still without power and still had tarps on their homes from Charlie when Francis came. And you mentioned Francis being that super soaker. I remember Francis just sitting off the coast, off the southeast coast, just kind of spinning, taunting us that weekend. And then it was so slow. I think it made landfall Saturday night into Sunday morning. And it was still spawning tornadoes in Marion County Monday afternoon. It was just like, okay, people who have no power and people who have damage to their homes still this getting soaked and, tornadoes. It was just truly, truly horrific. And as you said, looking back at this, we're certainly not making light of anything. I mean, we're talking about 15 people lost their lives with Charlie, $14 billion total damage. But man, it was wild. I don't think any of us heading into it really thought that it was going to turn out to be the horror that it was in Central Florida. When it moved across our area, we still had 106 mile per hour wind gusts at MCO, and it made landfall as a Category 4 in Southwest Florida.
And if I recall correctly, all these storms moved through overnight. We didn't have the blessing of these happening in the middle of the day when there was daylight out and you could see what was coming. And with that, I think folks were up all day preparing. I know we were. And then you're up all night watching and listening to your house rattle and shake and creak and make these weird noises. And so now you're up all night and then you are just exhausted the next morning when you walk outside and you just see at best piles of leaves in your front yard, branches down. That smell of freshly chainsawed trees. And the minute I smell that, I'm taken back 20 years ago to those storms.
Yeah, and what I always think about is the people afterwards who are injured or who lose their lives in chainsaw accidents and with generators, because we see that every single storm we have in Central Florida, and we always talk about that, but it seems that is a big risk, not necessarily people losing their lives as a result of the storm directly, but indirectly afterwards. And man, there's that radar imagery. One thing that people always talk about with Charlie was kind of the change in the track and the wobble, and how everyone in Tampa was expecting it to come there. It wobbled a little bit more to the east and northeast and took more of that track into Southwest Florida than kind of up I-4. And people were saying, oh, they weren't prepared. I think that's when we really learned not to focus on that line, because the entire area affected was in the cone. And, the margin of error with Charlie, with the official forecast, I think it was only 45 miles. I think average is 60 miles. So the forecast change kind of toward the end was well within that margin of error, but people seemed so enraged because there was so much focus on the line. So I think that's a big thing that people hopefully have taken from that over the last 20 years, that we can't focus
I remember
on the
when
line.
when we left the station, I was with photographer Dave Pavlik, who recently passed away, very sad, and it kind of chokes me up looking at these videos. But I remember Dave and I, we were originally dispatched up to Lake County, and I remember we kind of commandeered a mobile home park that everybody else had evacuated, and we were hanging out there. And then they said, no, the storm's wobbled, it's coming south, move into Sanford. And so I think that was the appreciation that those things can move like that, and where they go, those are the folks impacted the hardest.
Yeah, and forecasting has come a long way in 20 years, but again, no forecast is 100%, no technology is 100%. So that is why we spend so much time talking about the science behind the tropics and as we're making those forecasts. And I cannot stop staring at that man with the beer. Do you recall what he said? I know we're going to wrap this up here in a minute.
I believe he was staying at a nearby hotel, and that was my first, even though I didn't get to participate in hurricane parties, it appears this gentleman had, and there were, again, I don't want to make light of this storm, but as you'll recall, so this was the first time Central Florida got hit with these type of storms, and then the next day everybody loses power, and there was a mad rush for generators, and it was like winning the lottery if you could find a generator. Well, I couldn't find one after Charlie. I had a pregnant wife home at the time, and that was not fun, not for me, for her. But you couldn't find generators. Well, it was, I think eventually after that storm season, I got a generator, and it has been in a box, traveled to 3 or 4 of my homes now for the last 20 years. I have never opened the box. They could have sold me a box of bricks. I would open up and have no idea. And I've been tempted to cut it open 20 years later and see if it's even in there, if it would run. I doubt it would. It's probably all corroded. But that has been my good luck charm. I'm afraid to open that box because ever since then I haven't lost power. So I'm going to keep moving it around with me as I go.
I like it. All right, Mike Deforest, I feel like we could talk all day about this. You're gonna join us on News 6 at 4:30, and we're gonna talk some more about Charlie coming up on News 6 at 4:30. Right?
We'll see you then.
Okay, thanks so much. All right, let's get a quick check of the forecast before we let you go. We are watching Tropical Storm Ernesto. This is not going to be a factor for our weather, but as of the 11 o'clock advisory, maximum sustained winds were at 50 miles per hour. It's moving to the west-northwest. A front that's going to bring us some drier air toward the end of the week is going to come off the East Coast, and that is going to turn Ernesto off to the north. So this will be a hurricane affecting Bermuda by the weekend. Here's a look at what's going on for us. If you are in Sumter County, you are seeing some pockets of heavy rain approaching the turnpike. Rain chances for today are at 40%. So as we take you through the afternoon hours toward around school pickup time, even those afternoon practices, I don't think we're talking about super widespread activity. But again, some showers and storms will move from west to east. And as we take you through the afternoon and into the evening hours, I think most of that should wrap up for us by around sunset. But still, we can't rule out a few stray isolated showers toward around 8, 9 o'clock. Flagler County, you're under a heat advisory again until 6 o'clock. We're talking about triple-digit heat index readings in a lot of spots. Right now, the Villages, you're at 89, 90 in Orlando, and 91 in Palm Coast. It feels like 102 in Leesburg and Kissimmee, feels like 104 in Cocoa Beach, and feels like 109 in the Villages. Here is your 7-day forecast. 95 for our high today. Now, tomorrow will be a little bit warmer. We go to 97 degrees. Thursday, that's when we're looking for that front that will turn Ernesto. That's a coolish front. It's going to come into our area. The big difference, though, will be drier air, which means the heat index readings will not be as high. Highs stay in the mid-90s, morning lows in the mid to upper 70s. We'll talk much more about your forecast for you coming up on News 6 at 4. Lewis Bolden will join us with more on his story we talked about, and Mike Deforest will join us more talking about 20 years since Hurricane Charlie. Lisa Bell and Ginger Gadsden will be with us as well. If you have any questions or comments for us here at Take 6, head to clickorlando.com/Take 6. Let us know what's on your mind. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you at 4.